Any case, my job normally is to introduce the speaker, but for purpose of saving time, I'm not going to tell you what amazing speaker you have today. We'll just get right into it. I'm going to tell it in three bits. Firstly, to tell you about Haldane Murray, then a little bit about the war, and then about our trip. Haldane Murray was born Andrew Haldane Murray to Dr. Andrew Murray, the well-known Dutch Reformed minister, and his wife, Emma Rutherford. He grew up in Wellington. He went to South African College to study to follow in his father's footsteps in the church. He then got a bursary to Cambridge, and he met some people and became a little bit enlightened. And an archivist, Henry Bartman, writes about him. He said, here his horizons broadened beyond the narrow Calvinistic tenets of his forebears and made him realize the ministry was not for him. So this was a very, very big dilemma for him. He knew how catastrophic it would be for his parents, how saddened they would be, and he didn't know how to go about it. So he went off to Scotland for a couple of weeks to mull it over. And then he wrote to his father, telling him, I am giving up the faith of my father. And naturally, his father was distraught, but they wrote letters to each other on a very high technical level of religion, which I don't understand. But his mother was much more practical. She said, this is worse than having a child die, which was quite tough on him. Isabel Murray, she wrote a book about Dr. Andrew Murray and his letters to his children, and she writes about Haldane. Even at a youthful age, Haldane possessed a strikingly thoughtful and independent mind and a very considerable intellectual ability. This was good to read because my grandmother, Andre, used to say, oh, he was the cleverest of the lot. I thought she was being a bit biased, but it appears that is so. He then didn't go into church. He decided to go into teaching. He became headmaster of the school in Swellendam at the age of 23. He then did his MA in moral and mental science and became inspector of schools at the age of 26 for the Eastern Cape. He had this vast remote areas visiting the far-lying schools and farms. And so when he married Minnie Parks, Minnie was Sarah Marie Edwards Parks. Her father was Richard Parks, the eldest of the four Wheatlands brothers, and her mother was Sarah Kerry Hobson. When they married, they didn't get married. They got married in a private home. They didn't get married in the church. But one of his multitude of cousins, I think Jan Hofmeyer, married them. She joined him in the Skotse Kariki, traveling all over the Eastern Cape, visiting the farms, and that's when she realized she had married a public institution because everyone needed his help. This farmer's wife needed a zinc butt and everything that he would provide on their next trip. After their first child, Andre, which was our grandmother, was born, they could no longer travel. It was inconvenient to travel. So it coincided at the same time as her father dying, Minnie's father dying. So they scraped together their resources and purchased portlock from the estate and went sheep farming. Now, Haldane was very much into organized agriculture, cultural and community affairs. He did represent Victoria East, which was something like Adelaide, in the Parliament. He was actually on the board of the Reserve Bank. He one of the instigators of starting the Advertiser, and he was the editor until they could find someone to do the job. His wife, Minnie, was apparently the farmer and the practical one. He loved poetry. She was very instrumental in, not instrumental, but very much a woman's liber, women's rights, and she was a very good friend of Olive Schreiner. I think reading about, the only dispute at one stage was Minnie, I think, was more women's rights than Olive. I mean, they would have arguments about that, but they were feisty people. Minnie, Haldane used to love sitting around the fire, reading poetry to his family and friends and anyone who would listen. And Minnie would say, but why can't they say in plain English what they mean? Just before the war, they purchased Brudestrom and made that their home. So with the First World War, Haldane joined the Graafnet Commando to suppress the Afrikaner uprising and to go on the Southwest African campaign. And when that was finished, Louis Botha and Smuts asked him to round up some men from Graafnet to go to German East Africa. He was 49 years old at that stage, and Botha felt he was more valuable to the country, inside the country, than going, and didn't want him to go. He actually offered him a governmental post to do with solving the poor white problem, because he had a great caring for that. In any case, his reply was, you can't ask me to collect the men, and I've got to say go. I've got to say come. So he went. They signed up. This is now for German East Africa, and he wrote a journal of his every day, which he posted to Minnie. It wasn't love stories. It was a journal. He probably wrote other letters to Minnie and his children, which he did. But it was a whole story of the war, and it was published in the Graafnet Advertiser. I never knew why I had this whole pack of 1916 advertisers. And then one day it occurred to me that that was the war. And that was when Haldane died. And so Felicity and Margie took those papers and have got all the journals out of them, the whole 54 pages of A5 or whatever you call it, A4. And in this, he describes his whole trip. And he describes getting on the train and going to Roberts Heights. And in all this research, I come across a guy called R.F. Thiessen. And I realized this is Peggy Mosley's father. Writes a letter to my grandmother. He happened to be in Haldane's troop. There were 6 Grootfontein guys who decided to sign up for the war and went to Roberts Heights to train. And he describes his officers when he met them for the first time. Officer Captain John McCabe, Lieutenant Haldane Murray, Lieutenant Weiner, and Lieutenant Manley. A more unmilitary group it would be difficult to find. So, sorry, I'm not getting my pictures all clear for you. Huh? Okay, there we have Minnie, who I've spoken about. Yeah, he signs up. That's Haldane on the left and Captain McCabe in the middle. I'm not sure who the others are. That is General Paul von Lettow-Vorbeck. He was in command of the Germans in German East Africa. His role was to occupy as many Allied forces in Africa, keep them busy so they didn't go north. So he was an absolute guerrilla warfare expert. All he did was shoot a few bullets and then retract into the jungle. And it made it very, very difficult. Their troops were mainly Askaris. They were immune to malaria and dysentery and all that. These Allied troops there were times when only a third of the troops were fighting. The rest were all sick with malaria and dysentery. In his journal, he can't explain where he's going because it's censorship. So I get this map out of Nace Rates' book, Tracking On. Leave Roberts Heights, go to Durban and get off at Mombasa. Take the train up to Tavita, which is on the border of Kenya and Germany, East Africa. There they stay for about 4 days when they are called to come and help Colonel, whatever, Van Deventer, who is holding Kondoa. So they leave, and Ralph Thiessen, Peter Moses' grandfather, explains how they leave. He says, most of us had never ridden before, didn't know our mounts. So the first 5 miles, a lot of equipment and food was left lying behind. In any case, they down to Kondoa, and they hold, this is across the Maasai Flats. It's literally going from Waterhole to Waterhole to Dodoma to Waterhole, eventually landing up here at Morongoro about 2 months later, where Smuts makes his headquarters. In Haldane's journal, he describes everything to Minnie. He describes how the vegetation looks. It looks like the flats of the northern Transvaal, or it looks like the forests of Knysna, or it looks like the mountain behind Portlock House, just steeper. He describes getting to a mission station where the Germans have just left, and that's the whole story of their war. They just shot a few shots and moved out of the way. He describes the flowers and the scenery, and he describes the roses are like the red ones in Mrs. Minnard's garden. He describes hunting and searching for food. He describes the songs which they played and sung. I actually went and Googled them and made a list of them, and we played them when we were up there. So all these old Tipperary, etc. songs. He describes the trees. And one of the trees he describes is a monkey puzzle tree. Now the tree is so tall and the stem is so smooth that not even monkeys can climb it. And the Maasai, they call themselves Maasai, not Maasai. The Maasai call it a Jesus tree because no one but Jesus could get to the top of the tree. So Ralph Thiessen describes to my grandmother how Haldane around the campfire related bits of his letters from his children to them. I believe he was always referring to us by nickname, and the children will refer back. And the other 6 nicknames of the Grootfontein crowd. This is just a bigger map. This is Mlali, where this picture just gives you the Uluguru Mountains, which are, this is tropical country. The mountains are steep and high. It is absolutely impossible country. And this is where they first, all along, they are making contact with Van Lethoff all the way. He just pulls them along till here. There are shots, and he pulls them through these mountains. There's the mission station where the red roses. And they spent 2 months to get here. Yeah, they spent about another month in these mountains. The colonel describes, we had climbed hills to his troops that even a monkey with a walking stick would find it difficult to climb. We had hoped the Germans would make a stand, but all they want to do is prolong the war. Haldane describes how the world opens up. This is after a month. And they see these large open plains with lots of trees. So that's Kisaki. And a lot of this I'm going to read to you now because this is the last day of Haldane's journal. On the 16th of September, Haldane writes, along river's side, we are very heartsore today. At 8:30 this morning, Captain and I were sitting talking to the Colonel when shots caused us to saddle our horses and back with them and men to a position on the bank of the river. An hour later, Captain McCabe got a slight wound through the finger and right ear as he was adjusting his glasses. And Lieutenant Weiner was shot dead through the head. as we dislodged the sniper too late. This was his last entry, Haldane's last entry. Ralph Thiessen describes how the day went, with Captain McCabe being wounded and Lieutenant Weiner being killed, and how they were pinned down. It was 11 o'clock, and they had not eaten since the previous day, when Quit, Lieutenant Murray's batman, arrived with a billy can with boiled beans in it. Lieutenant Murray insisted we each have a spoonful. I doubt whether there was anything left for him. At about noon, the enemy retreated, and we advanced across the river through the fields. Peter Rose, writing to Minnie, takes up the story. On our arrival at the road, we were fully exposed, but all signs of the enemy had disappeared, and great was our surprise when we found two Maxims playing on us. The first shot fired shattered my arm, that's Peter Rose, rendering me useless. We were entirely at their mercy, for as usual, they could see without being seen. When the firing quietened, Lieutenant Murray received orders to retire. It was then that Lieutenant Murray gave me a hand. We had covered about 30 yards when the fire started again. But before we could take cover, our lieutenant and friend received his first wound, and I my second. One of his troopers wrote, "At dusk, we went forward to fetch Rose, and to our dismay found Lieutenant Murray with a wound through his chest. He died that night. He was buried with full military honours at the foot of a huge forest tree. His batman Quit placed stakes all around his grave, and his brother John was a military minister, and he buried him. Our troop is absolutely broken-hearted at the loss of our best friend we have had during this campaign. We are wondering how we are going to get on in the future, as he has always been father to us, getting food for us when rations were short, attending us when ill, getting horses for us when ours went under, and at times giving us his horse and walking. Minnie received a citation from the king saying that had he lived, he would have received the DSO. Now, our grandmother, Andre, was at South African College at the time that he died, and she was 18. She was on the train back to, and she and her mother, Minnie, had decided to go to the sea for a few weeks, and she was at Oudtshoorn, and she got the telegram of her father's death, and she rerouted back to Graafrenet. And she writes, "There was a girl sitting in a crowded railway carriage with pitying faces all around her, a crushed telegram in her hand, trying to realize the fact the telegram had come to tell her. I spent most of the night fighting for self-control, and then early in the morning we neared home. There the flags were half-mast, and my nerve went. Oh, daddy, daddy. They're flying for my daddy." So, yeah, that is the war. Why did we have an interest in going there? Why was he such a strong memory, such a strong person in our lives? And it was, I can only think it was kept alive by our grandmother. Haldane, because he had never gone into the church, he did not christen his own children. He decided that they should decide for themselves. And as it happened, my grandmother never got christened in her life. When she got married, the Anglican Church wouldn't marry her. The Dutch Reformed Church married her. But I tell this story just to show you this is what's come down from, I think, from Haldane, was his morality. Gran never went to church. Guy had never been christened, but lived an incredible life of service and kindness. And Andrew McNaughton writes in the obituary. Now, Andrew was their neighbour, and he knew them very well. He was very good to them. And he writes the obituary and ends off saying, "A greater Christian I've never known," which was quite something to grant. So I say all that just to show you why we went on this trip, why his memory was so strong to us. This is where he describes how they come out of the Uluguru Mountains, these big open flats, treed flats. This is the Mageta River, which has been very much part of our research. This is Kisaki. Don't worry about those Kisakis. This is Kisaki. And there, more or less, with our research, is where Haldane was shot. What do we do when we get there? If we find this burial site, I mean, we never really gave it more than a 50% chance, if that high. And I felt we can't just say, okay, now we've got it, let's go home now. So I felt appropriate. We'll go and get a piece of dolerite, Easter clip from British Strip. And went out to Will, and Will said, yes, but there's some rocks up there where Wendy and Prue have engraved their names when they were still Murrays. Do you remember doing that? And that's where we found that stone. To find a flat Easter clip isn't easy, but it had to be flat because that already weighed 5.5 kilograms for our thing. So we called ourselves the Famous Five. We were sleuthing. We were from our Enid Blyton books. And we flew out to Dar es Salaam, hired a car, and drove out 200 kilometers west to a place called Morogoro, where they have a Commonwealth graveyard, where they had exhumed the troops, and the British are amazing. You'll see this now. All over, the troops get buried in Commonwealth graveyards. You can see that in Europe everywhere. And took us 6 hours to do the trip to Morogoro because the roads are so congested in Africa now. We had always had as on our bucket list, Red and I, to drive up there, go to Serengeti, maybe climb Kilimanjaro, and on the way look for Haldane's grave. But the roads are so congested now that we changed our minds. We decided to fly in, and that's what we did. That, at the foot of those hills, is the beautiful town of Morogoro. It's not a city, but it's close to us. It's one of the biggest centers in Tanzania. This graveyard, as you can see, is dedicated just to the troops of the First World War. And that's how it looks today still. There's sprinklers going in the background. There's a team of gardeners looking after that every day. 110 years later. Absolutely amazing. That's a gravestone put in that graveyard in memory of Haldane. Minnie did not want him exhumed and to be buried there. She refused permission. And her reasoning was she thought he'd be happier lying under the tree where his friends had buried him. But there it says, buried at the time in Dakawa, Mageta River military grave. Not a graveyard, but whose grave is now lost. And right at the bottom, it's very interesting words, their glory shall not be blotted out. That's just the 5, Enid Blyton's 5. I just took this picture to show you what a pretty town Morogoro is. That's our hotel with the Uluguru Mountains in the background. All the next pictures are just pretty scenery. I mean, we spent 6 hours driving from Morogoro down to Kisaki, which is only 150 km, but it is stunningly beautiful. But it shows the absolutely impossible fighting conditions that they had to contend with. Imagine trying to ride a horse through that and see where your enemy is. Wherever there's tar, it's very steep. My pictures don't show that. Otherwise, it's just ground roads. There are no other vehicles around. Nothing. Motorbikes, bicycles, and the odd transport bus. I mean, Haldane describes tying the grass over his horse's back. You know? That bridge, as you arrive, they rebuild it for you to cross that river. That's what those guys are doing there. That's a monkey puzzle tree. That's the flats that he describes when they get out of the Uluguru Mountains, the beautiful treed flats. And in the distance there is Kisaki. So they've come out of the Uluguru Mountains here, and that's Kisaki, where we're headed to. This is the Mageta River, which had been part of our research for 6 months. So it was quite a feeling to get to this river eventually. This bridge is part of the beacons we had to follow. And this is the little piece of road where we pictured that last, where they were shot, where Peter Rose and Haldane Murray were shot. In our research, that whole Dakawa Mageta River, that's all we had. That's 8 kilometers of riverfront. I studied it, looking for all the trees possible. And then one day Lorette and I were going to go, and in March, and I went and spoke to Peter Wadlow, who's a PhD, and he said, no, it's the wet season, go in the dry season, August. So we delayed it. As I said, Felicity and Margaret also wanted to come with, and so we were 5. And Felicity had mentioned that she wanted to find this grave when she wrote a chapter in 100 Years On. It's a book about many people in the First World War. It was chapters of various characters, and she had expressed the wish to find this tree. And then in about May, 2 sentences came up. He was buried 8 miles north, at the crossing north of Kisaki. There's a bridge there, and there's a bridge there. That's only a few k's, that's 8 k's, miles. And then another sentence came out, a quarter of a mile from the river crossing of the Mageta on the Kisaki Road. All of a sudden, we didn't have to look at that whole river anymore. We just had to look there. And there are only 7 trees there that are a quarter of a mile away. I mean, that's next to the bridge. In that radius, there are only about 7 trees that they're going to go and look for. So we book. This is literally on and in the Selous National Park, the Nyeri National Park. So when you book accommodation, you're paying United States prices, $2,000 a night. So we couldn't afford it, so we found a place for $350 a night, fully catered, not transport, but for 2 people. And it was still expensive for our rands, but very affordable. And it was Lamara Eco Lodge. This is Lipa. Lipa is a Maasai. Lost his father when he was 12. Went to look for his grave as well. So he understood what he'd been helping us for many months now. Because I wanted someone like us aboard so he could talk to the locals to find out if they knew something, because they have this good, deep respect for the past and their ancestors. They might know of a grave. And he goes, Lipa, he's 35, he's unmarried because he hasn't got enough cattle yet to get a wife. He was the best one of his year when they go through their traditional passing of age ceremonies, and that's why he's got that white thing on his thing there, on his arm. Someone recognized his abilities. All he wanted to do was become a safari guide. He learned to speak English. He worked very, very hard. Someone recognized his abilities and has invested in him. This lady is Moroccan. She lives in Europe somewhere. She doesn't have a lot of money. But he's done an amazing job here. This is his lodge. And there are almost no bolts, no nails and screws. There are a few bolts holding that top structure. It's all done with ropes. That's all it is. That's the dining room lounge. The tropical, you don't need windows and doors. There's 3 little chalets. And I put this picture in because this evening is the night. Tomorrow we're going to go and look for this tree. And we really don't know we're going to find it. We've allocated 3 days to find this tree. And I'm wondering, Lipa will surely let us put this stone that we've taken all the way with us somewhere if we don't find that tree. And the next day we head off. But this is stunning country. Absolutely tropical. This is the Mageta River. This tree is too close to the bridge, so I'd thought we would get in our vehicle and just, if you Google it, all looks quite barren. Just drive from tree to tree. But you can't. There are no roads. No one owns vehicles, bicycles and motorbikes. So you've got to walk carefully. You don't walk on people's crops. Yeah, he's speaking to these farmers, asking if they had any, excuse me, any idea of burial sites. We get to our first tree, our second tree. We're looking for things on them. We don't know what we're looking for. Third tree. And so it goes on. There are only about 5 there. We find nothing unusual. We walk back. It takes quite a bit of time because, we're looking, we're chatting, and about an hour and a half later, 2 hours later, we get back to our vehicle and we drive a quarter of a mile to the last 2 trees that we have to go and look at. So we walk down this little gully here to that tree, and all of a sudden, there's a strange, we all know something, not all of us, but most of us have a funny feeling. There's something different here. We just knew absolutely. Even Lipa, the Maasai, said this. And that whole tree has got stones all around it. If we'd gone to that tree first, we wouldn't have thought that's strange. But we'd been to all the other trees. These are the first stones in that whole search we found. So we knew this is it. So I went to the tree, that other tree, 30, 40 meters away, no stones. So either the troops had gone into that gully and picked up some stones, there were a few there, and packed them, or at that level, there's a layer of stones, just like going Grafrenet at a certain level, and they'd been dug up. All the other troops around there were about 4 to 6 people buried there. The others had all been exhumed. So there was a lot of action, a lot of stones. So that there's, and it's a quarter of a mile south of the Kasaki Road. I mean, it was an amazing, amazing feeling. We didn't know what to say, what to do. Eventually, I was very emotional, just walked away. And we then went to a cattle market, and that was interesting. Some of the cattle get bought and get sent off to Dar es Salaam and Morogoro. They get trekked. And the other cattle are there for people, the Maasai, to buy, to get Labola. 25 cows you need for Labola. You can negotiate down to 18, but the paler she is, it goes up to 50. It's interesting. There again, I asked, there's a little row of rocks, and I asked Lepa, how do you bury your people? He says north-south. I said, this row is east-west. Just other things that made us feel quite goose-flesh. On the way back from the cattle market, we stopped at this, we went into the hills, and this is a little hut that David Livingstone lived in for about 3 weeks. We had a flat wheel on the way back, and that's super quick, really efficient, unbelievable. Cost a whole 40 rand to have my tire repaired. That's Kasaki. Kasaki, all the shops are on the road, there's a lot of dust. They're very curious, inquisitive people. They all work incredibly hard. Every day they get up and work, but they want to know who we are. Because we're the only people riding around in a vehicle there. There are no other vehicles. There's the odd tourist that might pass through there once every 2 weeks or something on their way to Saloon National Park. If they ask you who you are, we say, where are you from? We say, Mandela. Oh, Bafana, Bafana. Whoa! That's all you have to say. So the next day, we go and place our stone. In Dar es Salaam and in Morogoro, we had looked for bookshops, not easy, but we had found bookshops and we had bought Swahili books to give to a school. Because Haldane was a teacher, and we did about 6 kilometers away from this tree was the school of Serenge, whatever it is. There was Margie and Bruce and Felicity went to give the books. I didn't want all 5 of us standing around here deciding where the stone was going to be placed and everyone finding another place. I wanted Loretta and I to be alone there. They went. The school has 600 pupils, 4 teachers. Yeah. In any case, it's not that I can't work, it's just that Loretta doesn't trust me. So Lloyd gently put those nails in for us then. Just before I left, Linda comes to me with this, and that is a lock of Minnie's hair. And it says sent to me in London. Now, we don't know who me is. We're still going to find out. We're going to do a bit of sleuthing still. But I don't know what to do with this hair. I find it quite exciting. Felicity finds it exciting. Margie thinks it's creepy, but it's beautiful. And we find, Lorette says that hair doesn't age. And it's incredible. We asked hairdressers, 100-year-old hair still can be sold for wigs. It doesn't age. In any case, so I take that with, and Lorette and I have put the stone there. I've dug a hole under the stone. And so when they arrive, Felicity and I bury that hair under the stone. Lorette's very emotional, but they've been reunited after 109 years. Can I play this for you? Then Margie and Felicity each made a little talk about why and about why we were there and honouring Haldane. Lorette found it also very emotional, and we didn't tape it, so we got them to do it again. But that's a long thing, and I'm not going to play it now. In the club, our club, there's a plaque in the games cards room to 4 members of the club who died during the First World War: Norman Serapia Hobson, Alexander McFarlane, Andrew Haldane Murray, and Peter Storm Rose. And those palms were planted in memory of those 4 people. Yeah. In any case, Gran told us about, and I also told you in this talk, about Haldane's love of poetry. And he was very much like Walt Whitman's poetry. And he used to quote saying, "A man must make time to loaf and invite his soul." So that's what we were doing there. Thank you. That's it.